As the years flow by like the gentle waters of the Niger River, the true magnitude of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage begins to reveal itself. What began as a personal spiritual journey has become something far greater, a transformative moment in human history that will echo through the centuries, changing not only the Mali Empire but the entire world's understanding of Africa and its place in the grand tapestry of civilization. The emperor's footsteps, once pressed into the sand of the Sahara, have become pathways of cultural exchange that will endure long after the last grain of that ancient sand has been scattered by the winds of time. In the great scriptoriums of Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad, scribes bend over their parchments by candlelight, carefully recording the accounts of travelers and merchants who have witnessed the African emperor's magnificent passage. These chronicles, written in elegant Arabic script, will become the foundation for a new understanding of sub-Saharan Africa that will spread throughout the Islamic world and beyond. The image of Mansa Musa, once known only to his own subjects, begins to take shape in the collective imagination of the medieval world as a figure of almost mythical proportions. The most famous of these representations appears in the Catalan Atlas of 1375, a magnificent work of medieval cartography that will preserve the emperor's image for all time. In this remarkable map, created by Jewish cartographers in the Kingdom of Majorca, Mansa Musa appears seated on his throne, holding a golden orb that symbolizes his immense wealth. The caption beside his image reads, "This Negro lord is called Musa Mali, lord of the Negroes of Guinea. So abundant is the gold which is found in his country that he is the richest and most noble king in all the land." This single image, no larger than a human hand, represents a revolution in European consciousness. For the first time, medieval Europe is presented with the image of an African ruler as wealthy and powerful as any European monarch, challenging long-held assumptions about the distribution of wealth and power in the world. The atlas will be studied by scholars, consulted by merchants, and admired by nobles throughout Europe, each viewing carrying with it the recognition that Africa is not a continent of poverty and primitiveness, but a land of great kingdoms and sophisticated civilizations. The impact of this new awareness extends far beyond the realm of academic curiosity. European merchants begin to dream of trade routes that might connect them to the legendary wealth of the Mali Empire, while adventurers fantasize about expeditions that might reach the fabled cities of gold. The Portuguese, who have been slowly exploring the African coast, intensify their efforts with renewed hope of reaching the sources of African wealth that Mansa Musa has revealed to the world. But the most profound and lasting impacts of the pilgrimage are felt not in the distant lands of Europe, but in the heart of West Africa itself, where the emperor's transformation continues to reshape the civilization he governs. The architectural revolution that began with his return from Mecca reaches its fullest expression in the years following his pilgrimage, as the skilled craftsmen he brought back from the Middle East work to transform the appearance of Mali's cities. The great mosque of Timbuktu, designed by the master architect Saheli, rises from the desert like a prayer made manifest in mud and stone. Its distinctive minarets, decorated with wooden beams that project from the walls like ancient spears, create a silhouette that will become one of the most recognizable symbols of African Islamic architecture. The mosque's courtyard can accommodate thousands of worshippers, while its library will eventually house hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, making it one of the great centers of learning in the medieval world. The architectural style that emerges from this cultural synthesis is uniquely African, combining Islamic design principles with indigenous building techniques and local materials. The distinctive pyramidal minarets, the intricate decorative patterns carved into mud brick walls, and the integration of buildings with their natural environment create a form of architecture that is both deeply Islamic and authentically African. This style will spread throughout West Africa, influencing building design from Senegal to Nigeria and creating a visual language that will endure for centuries. The educational revolution that accompanies the architectural transformation is equally profound and lasting. The scholars and teachers who returned with the emperor from his pilgrimage work tirelessly to enhance the curricula of Mali's schools and universities, introducing new subjects and teaching methods that will raise the intellectual standards of West African education to levels that rival the greatest centers of learning in the Islamic world. The University of Sankore in Timbuktu becomes the crown jewel of this educational renaissance, attracting students from across Africa and the Islamic world. The university's library grows to contain between 400,000 and 700,000 manuscripts, covering subjects ranging from Islamic theology and law to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and literature. The scholars who teach at Sankor become renowned throughout the Islamic world for their learning and wisdom, contributing to the ongoing development of Islamic thought while preserving and transmitting the intellectual heritage of Africa. The impact of this educational flowering extends far beyond the walls of the university itself. The students who study at Sankor carry their knowledge back to their home communities throughout West Africa, creating a network of educated individuals who will serve as teachers, administrators, and leaders in their own societies. The manuscripts that are copied and preserved in Timbuktu's libraries will survive for centuries, providing future generations with access to the intellectual achievements of medieval Africa. The economic transformation that results from the pilgrimage is equally significant, as the international connections established during the journey create new opportunities for trade and commercial development. The reputation for wealth and stability that the Mali Empire has gained through Mansa Musa's pilgrimage attracts merchants from throughout the Islamic world, while the emperor's strategic management of gold resources ensures continued prosperity for his subjects. The trade networks that develop in the wake of the pilgrimage extend the empire's commercial reach far beyond its traditional boundaries. Malian merchants establish trading posts in North Africa and the Middle East, while foreign merchants settle in Mali's cities to take advantage of new commercial opportunities. The standardization of weights and measures that the emperor implements upon his return facilitates this expansion of trade, while the diplomatic relationships established during the pilgrimage provide the political framework necessary for successful commercial development. The cultural synthesis that emerges from the pilgrimage creates new forms of artistic expression that blend Islamic and African traditions in unique and beautiful ways. The decorative arts that flourish in Mali's cities combine Islamic geometric patterns with African motifs and techniques, creating works of art that are both deeply spiritual and aesthetically stunning. The literary traditions that develop in the empire's schools and universities preserve African oral traditions while incorporating them into the broader Islamic literary heritage. The religious impact of the pilgrimage is perhaps the most profound and lasting of all its consequences. The emperor's example of piety and devotion inspires his subjects to deepen their own commitment to Islam, while the scholars and teachers who have accompanied him from the Middle East work to strengthen the religious education of Mali's people. The mosques that are built throughout the empire provide focal points for religious observance and community life, while the religious festivals and ceremonies that mark the Islamic calendar become integral parts of African cultural identity. The transformation that occurs in Mali following the pilgrimage represents one of the most remarkable examples of cultural adaptation in human history. The empire successfully integrates Islamic civilization into its existing social and political structures, while maintaining its distinctive African character. The result is a unique form of Islamic civilization that is both authentically African and genuinely Islamic, demonstrating the remarkable flexibility and adaptability of both traditions. The diplomatic revolution that results from the pilgrimage transforms Mali's position in the international community, establishing it as a major player in the complex web of relationships that governs the medieval Islamic world. The emperor's reputation for wealth and piety opens doors to diplomatic relationships that would have been impossible before his pilgrimage, while the international connections he has established provide the empire with valuable intelligence about political and economic developments throughout the Islamic world. The military implications of these diplomatic developments are equally significant, as the empire's enhanced international standing reduces potential sources of conflict while attracting allies and supporters. The reputation for wealth and power that the empire has gained through the pilgrimage serves as a deterrent to potential enemies, while the diplomatic relationships that have been established create opportunities for military cooperation when needed. The technological innovations that result from the pilgrimage enhance Mali's capabilities in numerous fields, from architecture and engineering to medicine and astronomy. The craftsmen and scholars who have accompanied the emperor's return introduce new techniques and knowledge that will improve the quality of life for the empire's subjects while enhancing its competitive advantages in the global economy. The social transformation that occurs in Mali following the pilgrimage reflects the emperor's enhanced understanding of Islamic principles of social justice and community responsibility. The charitable institutions that he establishes provide support for the poor and needy while strengthening the bonds that unite society. The educational opportunities that are expanded create new possibilities for social advancement while maintaining the traditional structures that provide stability and continuity. As the decades pass following the emperor's pilgrimage, the full significance of his journey becomes increasingly apparent. The transformation that he has brought to the Mali Empire extends far beyond the immediate changes in architecture, education, and administration. The pilgrimage has fundamentally altered the empire's relationship with the Islamic world and its understanding of its own identity and purpose. The manuscripts that survive from this period provide testimony to the remarkable intellectual achievements that result from the cultural synthesis initiated by the pilgrimage. Works of theology, law, mathematics, astronomy, and literature demonstrate the high level of scholarship that has been achieved in Mali's schools and universities. The preservation of these manuscripts in Timbuktu's libraries ensures that the intellectual heritage of medieval Africa will survive for future generations to study and appreciate. The archaeological evidence that remains from the empire's golden age provides additional testimony to the remarkable achievements that resulted from the pilgrimage. The ruins of mosques, palaces, and other buildings demonstrate the sophistication of #Mali Empire Script Part 1. The Rise from the Desert. Close your eyes and let the gentle sound of desert wind carry you back through the centuries. It is a warm evening in the year 1324, and the vast Sahara Desert stretches endlessly before you like a sea of golden sand. The sun hangs low on the horizon, painting the dunes in shades of amber and copper, while the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky above. In this seemingly empty wilderness, something extraordinary is about to unfold. Listen carefully, and you might hear it, the distant sound of bells tinkling in the desert breeze, the soft padding of thousands of feet on sand, and the low murmur of human voices carried on the wind. Somewhere out there in the vastness of the Sahara, the greatest caravan in human history is making its way toward the holy city of Mecca. At its head rides a man whose wealth would make the richest people of our modern world seem like paupers. Mansa Musa, ruler of the Mali Empire, the wealthiest person who has ever lived. But to understand the true magnitude of this moment, we must first journey back even further, to the time when the great empires of West Africa were still taking shape. Picture, if you will, the slow rhythm of history unfolding like the patient flow of a great river. For centuries, the Ghana Empire had dominated the gold trade of West Africa, its rulers growing rich from the precious metal that flowed through their lands like water. But by the early 13th century, that empire was crumbling, weakened by internal strife and external pressures from the north. Into this power vacuum stepped the Mandinka people, led by a legendary figure whose story would be told around fires for generations to come. His name was Sundiata Keita, and according to the oral traditions preserved by the griots, the traditional storytellers of West Africa, he was destined from birth to build a great empire. The epic of Sundiata tells of a lame prince who overcame incredible obstacles to unite the scattered kingdoms of the Niger River Valley into a single, powerful state. The year was 1235, and from the ashes of the old Ghana Empire, a new power was rising. The Mali Empire, as it would come to be known, emerged slowly at first, like a great tree growing from fertile soil. Its roots stretched deep into the rich alluvial lands of the Niger River Valley, that life-giving waterway that flows like a green ribbon through the heart of West Africa. This was not a barren desert kingdom, but a realm blessed with some of the most fertile land on the continent. Imagine standing on the banks of the Niger River in those early days of the empire. The water flows slow and steady, carrying with it the rich silt that has nourished these lands for millennia. Along the riverbanks, you can see the green fields of millet and sorghum swaying in the breeze, while beyond them, the landscape gradually gives way to the golden grasslands of the Sahel. This is the boundary zone between the fertile south and the arid north, a place where different worlds meet and mingle. The strategic importance of this location cannot be overstated. The Niger River served as a natural highway, connecting the forest kingdoms of the south with the desert trade routes of the north. Along its banks, settlements had grown up over the centuries, each one a stepping stone in the vast network of commerce that would make Mali wealthy beyond imagination. The empire's founders understood this geography intimately, and they built their state to take maximum advantage of these natural trade routes. But the Mali Empire was not simply a collection of river towns and trading posts. It was a vast territorial state that would eventually span an area larger than Western Europe, stretching from the Atlantic coast in the west to the Great Bend of the Niger River in the east, and from the edge of the Sahara in the north to the forest regions of the south. Within this enormous territory lived millions of people, speaking dozens of different languages and practicing countless different customs and traditions. The empire's capital, Niamey, was located in what is now Mali, near the headwaters of the Niger River. From this administrative center, the Munsas, the emperors of Mali, ruled over a complex federal system that allowed local communities to maintain their traditional ways of life while contributing to the greater prosperity of the empire. This was not a centralized tyranny, but a sophisticated political arrangement that balanced local autonomy with imperial unity. The wealth that would make Mali famous throughout the medieval world came from the empire's control of the gold trade. Deep in the forest regions of the south, in places like Bambuk and Bure, the earth was rich with the precious metal that medieval societies prized above all else. The gold was not found in great veins like modern industrial mines, but in alluvial deposits along rivers and streams, where it could be panned and sifted by individual miners working with simple tools. The process of gold extraction was labor-intensive and required great skill. Miners would work the riverbanks during the dry season, when water levels were low and the gold-bearing gravels were exposed. They used wooden bowls and animal hide bags to separate the heavy gold particles from the lighter sand and debris. The work was backbreaking, but the rewards were immense. Some nuggets found in these deposits weighed several pounds, and even the smallest flakes of gold dust were valuable enough to serve as currency. The empire's rulers established strict controls over the gold trade from the very beginning. All gold nuggets above a certain size had to be surrendered to the imperial treasury, while only gold dust could be traded freely. This system served two purposes. It ensured that the empire's rulers received their share of the wealth, and it maintained the value of gold by preventing the market from being flooded with large nuggets. The sight of a Mali merchant carrying a pouch of gold dust was common in the markets of North Africa and the Middle East. But gold was not the only source of Mali's wealth. Equally important was the empire's control of the salt trade. In the northern reaches of the empire, in the desolate expanses of the Sahara, lay the salt mines of Tagaza. These deposits had been formed millions of years ago when an ancient sea had evaporated, leaving behind thick layers of crystalline salt. The salt was cut from the ground in great rectangular blocks, each one weighing 30 to 40 pounds. The importance of salt in the medieval world cannot be overstated. In an age without refrigeration, salt was essential for preserving meat and other perishable foods. It was also necessary for human health, especially in hot climates where people lost large amounts of salt through perspiration. The high-quality salt from Tagaza was particularly prized because it was relatively pure and had a clean, sharp taste that enhanced the flavor of food. The contrast between the gold fields of the south and the salt mines of the north created one of the most profitable trading systems in the medieval world. Salt was worth its weight in gold in the southern regions, where it was scarce, while gold was abundant in the forest regions where salt was almost impossible to obtain. The Mali Empire sat squarely in the middle of this trade, controlling both the production of these precious commodities and the routes along which they were transported. The caravans that carried these goods across the empire were marvels of organization and endurance. Picture a typical trading expedition setting out from the gold fields of the south, bound for the salt mines of the north. The caravan might consist of several hundred men and as many as 1,000 camels, each beast carrying goods worth a small fortune. The merchants who organized these expeditions were skilled in the arts of negotiation and survival, able to navigate both the physical challenges of desert travel and the complex web of political relationships that govern trade in West Africa. The route from the gold fields to the salt mines took the caravans through the heart of the Mali Empire, past the great trading cities that had grown up along the Niger River. At each stop, the caravan would be met by local merchants eager to trade their own goods for a share of the precious cargo. The markets of these cities were cosmopolitan affairs, where Mandinka traders from the empire's heartland mingled with Berber merchants from the north, Hausa traders from the east, and representatives of dozens of other ethnic groups. The empire's third major source of wealth was its control of the slave trade. Slavery was a common institution throughout medieval Africa, as it was in most parts of the world at that time. The Mali Empire was both a source of slaves and a conduit for the slave trade between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean world. Slaves were obtained through various means. Some were prisoners of war captured in conflicts with neighboring states, others were criminals or debtors who had been enslaved as punishment, and still others were obtained through trade with communities that specialized in slave raiding. The slaves traded by Mali merchants were put to work in various capacities throughout the Islamic world. Some became domestic servants in the households of wealthy families, others worked in agriculture or crafts, and still others served in the military forces of North African and Middle Eastern rulers. The most unfortunate were sent to work in the harsh conditions of the Saharan salt mines, where life expectancy was measured in months rather than years. The fourth pillar of Mali's economy was the ivory trade. The forests of West Africa were home to large populations of elephants, and ivory was highly prized throughout the medieval world for its beauty and workability. Ivory was carved into decorative objects, religious artifacts, and luxury goods that were traded across vast distances. The empire's hunters and traders developed sophisticated techniques for tracking and killing elephants, and the ivory trade became an important source of revenue for the imperial treasury. But the Mali Empire was more than just a commercial enterprise. It was also a complex political entity that had to manage the challenges of governing a vast, diverse territory. The empire's political system was based on a federal model that allowed local communities to maintain their traditional forms of government, while acknowledging the authority of the Mansa and contributing to the imperial treasury through taxes and tribute. The empire was divided into provinces, each governed by a farba who was appointed by the Mansa and responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and ensuring that trade routes remained safe and open. These provincial governors were typically members of the imperial family or trusted allies who had proven their loyalty through years of service. They maintained their own courts and administrative staffs, and they were responsible for the day-to-day governance of their territories. The military that protected this vast empire was organized along traditional African lines, with a professional corps of soldiers supplemented by levies from the various provinces. The army was built around infantry units armed with spears, swords, and bows, but cavalry forces played an increasingly important role as the empire expanded into the grasslands of the Sahel. The Mali cavalry was renowned for its skill and bravery, and the sight of mounted warriors in their flowing robes became a symbol of imperial power. The empire's legal system was equally sophisticated, combining elements of Islamic law with traditional African legal principles. The Mansa served as the supreme judge and final arbiter of disputes, but most cases were handled by local courts that applied customary law to resolve conflicts within their communities. This hybrid legal system was flexible enough to accommodate the diverse customs and traditions of the empire's many ethnic groups while maintaining consistency in the application of justice. The religious landscape of the Mali Empire was complex and multifaceted. While the empire's rulers and urban elites gradually converted to Islam, the majority of the population continued to practice traditional African religions. This religious diversity was generally tolerated by the imperial government, which understood that forcing conversion would be counterproductive and might spark rebellions that could tear the empire apart. Islam came to West Africa through the trans-Saharan trade routes, brought by merchants and scholars who settled in the commercial centers along the Niger River. The religion appealed to many West Africans because it offered a sophisticated legal and ethical system, access to a vast network of fellow believers, and opportunities for education and advancement. But Islam in West Africa was not simply a foreign import. It was adapted to local conditions and blended with existing beliefs and practices. The result was a distinctive form of African Islam that incorporated elements of traditional spirituality while maintaining the core beliefs and practices of the faith. This syncretic approach to religion would become one of the defining characteristics of the Mali Empire, allowing it to maintain unity among its diverse populations while participating in the broader Islamic world. As the 13th century progressed, the Mali Empire continued to grow in size and influence. The empire's rulers established diplomatic relations with their neighbors, negotiated trade agreements with distant kingdoms, and built the infrastructure necessary to support long-distance commerce. Roads were built and maintained, rest stations were established for traveling merchants, and a system of weights and measures was standardized throughout the empire. The cities that grew up along the Niger River during this period became centers of learning and culture that would eventually rival the great cities of North Africa and the Middle East. The most famous of these was Timbuktu, which began as a modest trading post but would eventually become synonymous with wealth and learning in the medieval world. But Timbuktu was not alone. Cities like Djenné, Walata, and Gao also flourished under Mali rule, each contributing to the empire's cultural and economic development. The transformation of these settlements from simple trading posts into sophisticated urban centers was a gradual process that reflected the empire's growing wealth and influence. As trade increased and the empire's political structure became more stable, merchants and craftsmen began to settle permanently in these cities, building homes and workshops that would serve as the foundation for future growth. The architecture of these early Mali cities reflected the empire's unique position at the crossroads of different cultural traditions. Buildings were constructed using traditional West African techniques, with walls made from mud brick and roofs supported by wooden beams. But the designs were influenced by Islamic architectural principles, with courtyards, prayer halls, and other features that reflected the growing importance of Islam in urban life. The markets of these cities were vibrant, cosmopolitan places where goods from across the known world could be found. A visitor to the market at Timbuktu in the 13th century might encounter merchants from Morocco selling leather goods, traders from Egypt offering spices and textiles, and local craftsmen displaying their wares of gold, ivory, and copper. The air would be filled with the sounds of different languages, the scents of exotic spices, and the constant buzz of commercial activity. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these early Mali cities was their commitment to learning and education. Islamic scholars began to settle in these urban centers, establishing schools and libraries that would eventually attract students from across the Muslim world. The process was slow at first, but as the empire's wealth grew and its connections to the broader Islamic world strengthened, these educational institutions became increasingly sophisticated and influential. The foundation for what would become the Mali Empire's greatest achievement, the transformation of Timbuktu into one of the world's great centers of learning, was laid during these early centuries. Scholars began to collect manuscripts, establish schools, and create the intellectual infrastructure that would eventually support one of the largest libraries in the medieval world. As the empire entered the 14th century, it stood poised to reach heights of wealth and influence that would astonish the medieval world. The political foundations had been laid, the economic systems were in place, and the cultural synthesis that would define Mali civilization was taking shape. All that was needed was a ruler with the vision and resources to transform this promising beginning into something truly extraordinary. That ruler was about to ascend to the throne, and his name would become legend throughout the medieval world. But before we meet this remarkable figure, we must first understand the world he would inherit, a world where the patient work of empire building had created the conditions for unprecedented prosperity and cultural achievement. The stage was set for the Mali Empire's golden age, and the echoes of that achievement would resonate through the centuries to come, carried on the desert wind like whispers of a distant dream made manifest in the heart of Africa. Part 2. The Spiritual Transformation and Cities of Learning. The gentle call to prayer echoes across the Niger River Valley as dawn breaks over the empire, and we find ourselves in the heart of one of history's most remarkable religious transformations. The year is 1300, and across the vast territories of the Mali Empire, a quiet revolution is taking place, not through force or conquest, but through the patient work of merchants, scholars, and holy men who carry with them the message of Islam. Picture yourself walking through the dusty streets of a typical Mali town in the early 14th century. The air is filled with the sounds of daily life, the rhythmic pounding of millet in wooden mortars, the lowing of cattle being driven to pasture, the laughter of children playing in the shade of great baobab trees. But listen more carefully, and you will hear something new, the melodious recitation of Quranic verses from the mosque that has recently been built at the town's center. Its simple mud brick walls and wooden minaret reaching toward the sky like a bridge between earth and heaven. This is not the Islam of conquest or forced conversion, but something far more subtle and profound. The religion has come to West Africa through the ancient networks of trade and scholarship, carried by merchants who were as comfortable discussing theology as they were negotiating the price of gold. These traders brought with them not just goods and coins, but ideas and beliefs that would slowly transform the spiritual landscape of the empire. The process of Islamic conversion in the Mali Empire was gradual and complex, unfolding over generations like the slow growth of a great tree. The rulers and urban elites were among the first to embrace the new faith, drawn by its sophisticated legal system, its emphasis on literacy and learning, and its promise of connection to a vast community of believers that stretched from Spain to Southeast Asia. But Islam in Mali was not simply adopted wholesale. It was adapted, transformed, and blended with existing beliefs in ways that reflected the deep wisdom of African spiritual traditions. In the villages scattered across the empire, traditional beliefs continued to flourish alongside the new religion. The ancestors were still honored and consulted, the spirits of the land and water were still acknowledged and appeased, and the ancient rituals that had bound communities together for countless generations continued to mark the passage of seasons and the milestones of human life. But gradually, Islamic prayers began to be incorporated into these ceremonies. Quranic verses were recited alongside traditional invocations, and the names of Allah and the Prophet Muhammad began to appear in the oral traditions that preserved the history and wisdom of the people. This religious synthesis was not seen as contradictory or problematic, but as a natural evolution of spiritual understanding. The God of Islam was recognized as the same divine force that had always been present in the world, now revealed through a new set of practices and beliefs. The Prophet Muhammad was honored as a messenger of this divine truth, but he took his place alongside the ancestral spirits and traditional deities who had always guided and protected the people. The mosque became a new focal point of community life, but it did not replace the sacred groves and ancestral shrines that had long served as centers of spiritual power. Instead, these different sacred spaces complemented each other, creating a rich tapestry of religious expression that reflected the complexity and diversity of human spiritual experience. The Friday prayers at the mosque were attended by many of the same people who participated in traditional ceremonies at the full moon, and the imam who led the Islamic prayers might also be consulted about matters involving ancestral spirits or traditional healing practices. This harmonious blending of religious traditions was actively encouraged by the empire's rulers, who understood that religious tolerance was essential for maintaining peace and stability in their vast, diverse territories. The Munsas of Mali were practicing Muslims who built mosques, sponsored Islamic scholars, and made the pilgrimage to Mecca, but they also participated in traditional ceremonies and maintained the ancestral rituals that legitimized their rule in the eyes of their subjects. The empire's legal system reflected this religious pluralism, with Islamic law governing matters of commerce and interstate relations, while traditional customary law continued to regulate family disputes, land rights, and other local concerns. This dual legal system was administered by judges who were trained in both Islamic jurisprudence and traditional African law, ensuring that justice was dispensed in ways that were consistent with local customs and beliefs. The scholarly tradition that emerged from this religious synthesis was remarkably sophisticated, producing works of theology, law, and philosophy that were recognized throughout the Islamic world. Mali scholars became known for their ability to reconcile Islamic teachings with African wisdom traditions, creating new forms of Islamic thought that were uniquely African while remaining firmly grounded in the broader Islamic intellectual tradition. As we move deeper into the 14th century, our attention turns to the cities that would become the crown jewels of the Mali Empire, Timbuktu and Djenné. These were not merely trading posts or administrative centers, but genuine urban civilizations that would eventually rival the great cities of the medieval world in their wealth, sophistication, and cultural achievement. Timbuktu, whose very name would become synonymous with mystery and remoteness in the European imagination, began as a modest settlement at the point where the Niger River bends farthest north into the Sahara. The city's location was strategically perfect. It was the last major stop for caravans heading north into the desert, and the first welcoming site for traders returning from the harsh journey across the Sahara. Here, the river trade of the south met the caravan trade of the north, creating opportunities for commerce that would make the city fabulously wealthy. Imagine approaching Timbuktu for the first time in the early 14th century. The city rises from the flat landscape like a mirage, its mud brick buildings glowing golden in the desert sun. The walls are low and unpretentious, built for function rather than display, but within them lies a world of incredible diversity and sophistication. The streets are narrow and winding, designed to provide shade from the harsh sun, and they are filled with the most cosmopolitan population in medieval Africa. Here, you might encounter a Berber merchant from Morocco discussing business with a Mandinka trader from the empire's heartland, their conversation conducted in Arabic, the lingua franca of long-distance trade. Nearby, a group of Tuareg nomads, their faces wrapped in indigo cloth, examine a display of gold jewelry while a Hausa merchant from the east negotiates the price of leather goods with a local craftsman. The air is filled with the sounds of different languages, the sense of spices and perfumes from distant lands, and the constant hum of commercial activity. The markets of Timbuktu were organized with careful attention to the needs of different types of traders. The gold market was located in a secure area near the city center, where merchants could conduct their business in safety and privacy. The salt market was situated near the river, where the great blocks of salt from Tagaza could be easily loaded onto boats for transport to the south. The slave market, a grim reminder of the darker aspects of medieval commerce, was located on the city's outskirts, where the human cargo could be inspected and sold before being transported to their final destinations. But Timbuktu was more than just a commercial center. It was also becoming a major center of Islamic learning, attracting scholars from across the Muslim world who came to study and teach in its mosques and schools. The city's libraries were beginning to accumulate the manuscript collections that would eventually make Timbuktu one of the great repositories of human knowledge in the medieval world. The process of intellectual development in Timbuktu was gradual but inexorable. It began with the establishment of mosque schools where young men could learn to read and write Arabic, memorize the Quran, and study the basic principles of Islamic law. These schools were funded by wealthy merchants and government officials who understood that literacy and learning were essential for success in the increasingly complex world of international trade and diplomacy. As the city's wealth grew, so did its intellectual ambitions. Scholars began to establish more advanced schools that offered instruction in theology, law, mathematics, astronomy, and literature. Private libraries began to accumulate manuscripts copied by local scribes or imported from centers of learning in North Africa and the Middle East. The city's religious leaders began to correspond with scholars in Cairo, Baghdad, and other major centers of Islamic learning, participating in the great intellectual debates that were shaping Islamic thought. The architecture of Timbuktu reflected the city's growing prosperity and sophistication. The Great Mosque, later known as the Jingareber Mosque, was built in the distinctive Sudano-Sahelian style that would become the signature of West African Islamic architecture. Its walls were constructed from sun-dried mud bricks, plastered with a mixture of mud and organic materials that gave them a smooth, golden appearance. The mosque's minaret, reaching toward the sky like a massive thumb, was decorated with wooden beams that protruded from the walls, creating a distinctive pattern that was both functional and beautiful. The mosque's interior was designed to accommodate large numbers of worshippers, with a forest of columns supporting a flat roof that was punctuated by small openings to let in light and air. The mihrab, the niche that indicated the direction of Mecca, was decorated with intricate geometric patterns that reflected the mathematical precision of Islamic art. The overall effect was one of serene beauty and spiritual power, creating a space that was conducive to both prayer and contemplation. But Timbuktu was not alone in its achievements. The city of Djenné, located further south on the Niger River, was developing its own distinctive character as a center of both commerce and learning. Djenné's location in the fertile inland delta of the Niger River made it a natural hub for the agricultural trade that supplied the empire's growing urban population. The city's markets were filled with millet, sorghum, rice, and other foodstuffs that were essential for feeding the empire's cities and supporting its long-distance trade networks. The Great Mosque of Djenné, built in the same Sudano-Sahelian style as its counterpart in Timbuktu, was even more impressive in its scale and ambition. The mosque was constructed on a raised platform that lifted it above the surrounding buildings, making it visible from great distances across the flat landscape of the river valley. Its walls were thick and massive, designed to withstand the occasional floods that inundated the city during the rainy season. The mosque's facade was decorated with a series of towers and buttresses that created a dramatic play of light and shadow, while its interior was spacious enough to accommodate the entire population of the city during major religious festivals. The building's maintenance required the participation of the entire community, with annual festivals during which the citizens would gather to repair and replaster the walls, turning the work of construction into a celebration of communal solidarity. The educational institutions that developed in Djenné were closely connected to those in Timbuktu, creating a network of Islamic learning that spanned the empire. Students would travel between the two cities to study with different teachers, while scholars would move back and forth to participate in debates and discussions. This intellectual exchange was facilitated by the Niger River, which provided a convenient means of transportation between the two cities. The curriculum taught in these schools was remarkably comprehensive, covering not just religious subjects but also mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and literature. Students learned to calculate the complex mathematical relationships that govern the Islamic calendar, to predict eclipses and other astronomical events, and to understand the medical knowledge that had been preserved and developed by Islamic scholars. They also studied the great works of Arabic literature, memorizing poetry and prose that connected them to the broader cultural tradition of the Islamic world. The libraries that supported this educational activity were growing rapidly, accumulating manuscripts that were copied locally or imported from other centers of learning. These manuscripts covered an enormous range of subjects, from Quranic commentaries and legal treatises to works on mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The libraries were not just repositories of knowledge but active centers of intellectual production, where scholars would study, debate, and create new works that would contribute to the ongoing development of Islamic thought. The scribes who copied these manuscripts were skilled artisans who took great pride in their work. They used locally made paper and inks, creating books that were both beautiful and durable. The manuscripts were often decorated with geometric patterns and calligraphic designs that reflected the aesthetic principles of Islamic art. The most important works were bound in leather covers that were tooled with intricate designs, creating books that were treasured as works of art as well as repositories of knowledge. The intellectual life of these cities was supported by a complex network of patronage that included wealthy merchants, government officials, and religious leaders. These patrons funded the construction of mosques and schools, supported scholars and students, and sponsored the copying of manuscripts. Their generosity was motivated not just by religious devotion, but also by the practical understanding that education and learning were essential for the empire's continued prosperity and success. The scholars who taught in these institutions came from diverse backgrounds, reflecting the cosmopolitan character of the empire. Some were local West Africans who had received their education in the empire schools, while others were immigrants from North Africa and the Middle East who had been attracted by the opportunities for learning and advancement. This diversity of backgrounds created a rich intellectual environment where different perspectives and traditions could interact and cross-fertilize. The students who attended these schools were equally diverse, representing all levels of society and coming from across the empire and beyond. Some were the sons of wealthy merchants and government officials, while others were poor but talented young men who had been sponsored by charitable patrons. The schools were meritocratic institutions where advancement was based on ability and dedication rather than social status or family connections. As the 14th century progressed, the intellectual reputation of Timbuktu and Djenné began to spread throughout the Islamic world. Scholars in Cairo, Baghdad, and other major centers of learning became aware of the sophisticated educational institutions that had developed in West Africa. Some began to correspond with their West African counterparts, while others made the long journey to study in the libraries and schools of the Niger River Valley. This intellectual exchange was facilitated by the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that brought Muslims from across the world together in a shared spiritual experience. West African pilgrims would meet scholars from other parts of the Islamic world, exchanging ideas and establishing relationships that would continue long after the pilgrimage was completed. These connections helped to integrate the intellectual life of West Africa into the broader world of Islamic learning. The economic prosperity that supported this intellectual flowering was based on the empire's continued control of the gold and salt trades. The wealth generated by these trades provided the resources necessary to fund the construction of mosques and schools, to support scholars and students, and to acquire the manuscripts that filled the libraries. The empire's rulers understood that investment in education and learning was not just a religious obligation but also a practical necessity for maintaining their political and economic power. The administrative system that governed this vast empire was becoming increasingly sophisticated, with trained bureaucrats who could read and write Arabic serving as the backbone of imperial administration. These officials were often products of the empire's educational institutions, men who had received their training in the schools of Timbuktu and Djenné before entering government service. Their education in Islamic law and administration helped to create a uniform system of governance that could function effectively across the empire's diverse territories. The military that protected the empire was also being transformed by the spread of Islamic culture and learning. While the empire's armies continued to be organized along traditional African lines, they were increasingly led by officers who had received Islamic education and who understood the importance of connecting military service to religious duty. The concept of jihad, or holy war, was adapted to West African conditions, providing a religious framework for military campaigns that aimed to expand the empire's territories and protect its trade routes. The legal system that governed the empire was becoming more sophisticated as well, with judges who were trained in both Islamic law and traditional African legal principles. These judges were able to navigate the complex relationships between different legal traditions, ensuring that justice was dispensed in ways that were consistent with both religious requirements and local customs. The empire's legal codes were becoming more standardized, creating a uniform system of justice that could be applied consistently across different regions and ethnic groups. As we approach the year 1312, the Mali Empire stands at the threshold of its greatest period of prosperity and influence. The economic foundations have been laid, the political institutions have been refined, and the cultural and intellectual infrastructure has been established. The empire's cities are flourishing, its trade networks are expanding, and its reputation for wealth and learning is beginning to spread throughout the known world. But the empire still lacks the one thing that will transform it from a successful regional power into a legend that will endure for centuries. A ruler whose vision, wealth, and piety will capture the imagination of the medieval world. That ruler is about to ascend to the throne, and his name will become synonymous with the wealth and power of medieval Africa. The stage is set for the arrival of Mansa Musa, the man who will take the Mali Empire to heights of glory that will astonish the world, and whose pilgrimage to Mecca will become one of the most famous journeys in human history. Part 3. The Golden Ruler Mansa Musa ascends. The year 1312 dawns quietly over the empire, but it will prove to be one of the most momentous in the long history of West Africa. In the royal palace at Niani, the great halls echo with the soft sounds of preparation as the empire prepares for a transition that will reshape its destiny. The previous Mansa has passed away, and according to the ancient customs of succession, the throne must pass to a new ruler who will carry the weight of empire on his shoulders. The man who emerges from this succession is someone who has been carefully prepared for this moment throughout his life. His name is Musa, though he will become known to history as Mansa Musa, the King of Kings, the ruler whose very name will become synonymous with unimaginable wealth and power. But to understand the magnitude of what he will accomplish, we must first understand the man himself, for he is far more than simply a fortunate heir to an established throne. Picture Mansa Musa as he appears in the early days of his reign, a man in his prime, perhaps 30 years old, with the bearing of someone born to command but tempered by the wisdom that comes from careful observation and deep thought. His eyes reflect the sharp intelligence that has been honed by years of study and preparation, while his demeanor suggests the confidence of someone who has never doubted his destiny. This is not a man who has stumbled into power, but one who has been groomed for greatness from birth. The education that shaped Mansa Musa's character was comprehensive and deliberate. He had been raised in the court of his predecessors, observing the intricate dance of imperial politics and learning the subtle arts of governance. He had studied with the empire's finest scholars, mastering not only the Arabic language and Islamic law, but also the traditional wisdom of his ancestors. He understood the delicate balance required to rule over such a vast and diverse empire, where different peoples, languages, and customs had to be harmonized under a single political authority. But perhaps most importantly, Mansa Musa possessed a deep and genuine piety that would prove to be one of the defining characteristics of his reign. His conversion to Islam was not merely a political convenience or a cultural affectation, but a profound spiritual commitment that would shape every aspect of his rule. He prayed 5 times daily, fasted during Ramadan, and studied the Quran with the dedication of a devoted scholar. This religious devotion would provide the moral framework for his governance and would ultimately inspire the great pilgrimage that would make him legendary. The empire that Mansa Musa inherited in 1312 was already wealthy and powerful, but under his rule it would reach heights that no previous African state had ever achieved. The key to this unprecedented prosperity lay in the ruler's extraordinary ability to manage and expand the empire's control over the gold trade. The gold mines of Bambuk and Bure, which had been productive for generations, were now yielding quantities of the precious metal that defied comprehension. The scale of gold production in the Mali Empire during Mansa Musa's reign is difficult for modern minds to grasp. Contemporary Arab historians reported that gold was so abundant in the empire that it was used for everyday transactions, with gold dust serving as a common medium of exchange in the markets of Timbuktu and Djenné. The empire's rulers had developed sophisticated techniques for extracting, refining, and controlling the distribution of gold that maximized both production and imperial revenue. The mining operations themselves were marvels of organization and efficiency. Thousands of workers labored in the gold fields, using techniques that had been perfected over centuries of experience. The alluvial deposits along the rivers were worked systematically, with teams of miners panning and sifting the gold-bearing gravels with a precision that ensured no precious metal was wasted. The larger nuggets were carefully collected and reserved for the imperial treasury, while the smaller flakes and dust were allowed to enter the general circulation of trade. But Mansa Musa's genius lay not just in maximizing gold production, but in controlling its distribution in ways that maximized the empire's wealth and power. The imperial monopoly on large gold nuggets ensured that the most valuable pieces flowed directly to the royal treasury, while the circulation of gold dust maintained the liquidity necessary for everyday commerce. This system created a steady stream of revenue that dwarfed the resources available to any contemporary ruler in Africa or elsewhere. The wealth generated by this gold monopoly was almost impossible to quantify by medieval standards. Modern economists who have attempted to estimate Mansa Musa's wealth have suggested figures that range from $200 billion to $400 billion in contemporary currency, making him not just the richest ruler of his time, but potentially the wealthiest individual in human history. This wealth was not merely theoretical or symbolic, but real and tangible, consisting of actual gold that could be weighed, measured, and spent. The administration of this vast wealth required bureaucratic capabilities that rivaled those of any medieval state. Mansa Musa developed a sophisticated system of financial management that tracked the flow of gold from the mines to the imperial treasury, monitored the empire's various sources of revenue, and coordinated the distribution of resources across the empire's vast territories. This system was staffed by trained administrators who had been educated in the empire's schools, and who understood both the practical requirements of financial management and the religious obligations that governed the use of wealth. The early years of Mansa Musa's reign were marked by a series of administrative reforms that strengthened the empire's governmental structure and expanded its territorial control. The Mansa recognized that effective governance required more than just wealth. It demanded institutional capabilities that could manage the complex relationships between different regions, ethnic groups, and economic interests that made up the empire. One of his first initiatives was the standardization of weights and measures throughout the empire. Previously, different regions had used different systems of measurement, creating confusion and opportunities for fraud in commercial transactions. Mansa Musa ordered the creation of standard weights and measures that would be used throughout the empire, with bronze standards manufactured in the royal workshops and distributed to provincial governors for use in their territories. This standardization had profound effects on the empire's economic development. Merchants could now conduct business across vast distances without worrying about converting between different measurement systems, while the imperial government could more effectively monitor and tax commercial activities. The standardized weights were particularly important for the gold trade, ensuring that the precious metal was measured consistently regardless of where it was bought or sold. The legal system was also reformed and strengthened during these early years. Mansa Musa appointed new judges who were trained in both Islamic law and traditional African legal principles, creating a more uniform system of justice that could function effectively across the empire's diverse territories. These judges were given clear guidelines for handling different types of cases, with Islamic law governing commercial disputes and matters of personal conduct, while traditional law continued to regulate family relationships and local customs. The military was expanded and reorganized to better protect the empire's growing wealth and territorial holdings. New units were created and equipped with the finest weapons and armor that the empire's craftsmen could produce, while existing forces were retrained in new tactics and strategies. The empire's cavalry was particularly strengthened, with new breeds of horses imported from North Africa and the Middle East to improve the mobility and effectiveness of the imperial forces. But perhaps the most significant development during these early years was Mansa Musa's growing reputation for piety and religious devotion. The Mansa was known throughout the empire for his strict observance of Islamic principles, his generous support of religious institutions, and his commitment to spreading Islamic learning and culture. He funded the construction of new mosques, sponsored religious scholars, and established schools that would provide Islamic education to the empire's young people. This religious devotion was not merely a personal matter, but a deliberate policy that served important political and cultural purposes. By positioning himself as a devout Muslim ruler, Mansa Musa was able to strengthen his connections with the broader Islamic world and establish his legitimacy as a leader who deserved recognition and respect from his fellow Muslim rulers. This religious identity would prove crucial in the diplomatic relationships that would develop as the empire's influence expanded. The empire's connections with the Islamic world were strengthened through a variety of channels during these early years. Scholars and merchants from North Africa and the Middle East visited the empire in increasing numbers, bringing with them new ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. These visitors were received with great hospitality and generosity, creating networks of relationship that would prove valuable for the empire's future development. The empire's own scholars and merchants were also encouraged to travel abroad, studying in the great centers of Islamic learning and establishing commercial relationships with distant markets. These travels created a flow of knowledge and information that kept the empire connected to the broader currents of Islamic civilization and ensured that its people were aware of developments in the wider world. As Mansa Musa's reign progressed, the idea of making the pilgrimage to Mecca began to take shape in his mind. The Hajj was one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and every Muslim who was physically and financially able was expected to make this journey at least once in their lifetime. For a ruler of Mansa Musa's wealth and piety, the pilgrimage was not just a religious obligation but an opportunity to demonstrate his devotion to Allah and his commitment to the Islamic faith. But the Mansa's pilgrimage would be unlike any other in history. This would not be the simple, humble journey undertaken by ordinary believers, but a magnificent procession that would display the wealth and power of the Mali Empire to the entire Islamic world. The scale of the undertaking would require years of preparation and would involve the coordination of resources and personnel on a scale that had never been attempted before. The planning for this great pilgrimage began slowly, with discussions among the Mansa's closest advisors about the logistics and implications of such a journey. The empire's scholars consulted the religious authorities about the proper procedures for the Hajj, while the military commanders considered the security requirements for protecting such a valuable caravan. The empire's merchants provided expertise about the trade routes and commercial opportunities that might be available along the way. The religious significance of the pilgrimage was paramount in these discussions. Mansa Musa was deeply committed to fulfilling his religious obligations, and he wanted to ensure that his pilgrimage would be conducted in a manner that was consistent with Islamic law and tradition. He consulted with the empire's leading religious scholars about the proper rituals and ceremonies that would be required, and he made arrangements for the spiritual preparation that would be necessary for such a sacred journey. But the pilgrimage also had important political and economic implications that could not be ignored. The journey would provide an opportunity to establish diplomatic relationships with other Muslim rulers, to demonstrate the wealth and power of the Mali Empire, and to explore new commercial opportunities in distant markets. The Mansa understood that the pilgrimage could serve multiple purposes, advancing both his spiritual goals and his political and economic interests. The scale of the undertaking gradually became clear as the planning progressed. This would not be a simple journey with a small group of companions, but a massive expedition that would require the coordination of thousands of people and enormous quantities of supplies and equipment. The logistics of organizing such an expedition were daunting, requiring careful planning and coordination that would test the administrative capabilities of the empire. The financial resources required for such a journey were staggering, even by the standards of the wealthy Mali Empire. The cost of feeding and equipping thousands of people for a journey that would last more than a year was enormous, while the gold that would be distributed as gifts and alms along the way would represent a significant portion of the empire's accumulated wealth. Only a ruler of Mansa Musa's extraordinary resources could contemplate such an undertaking. The selection of personnel for the pilgrimage was equally complex. The expedition would need to include not only the Mansa and his immediate entourage, but also soldiers for protection, servants for daily needs, scholars for religious guidance, merchants for commercial activities, and craftsmen for maintaining equipment and supplies. Each group would require different types of supplies and equipment, and the coordination of all these different elements would require careful planning and management. The route for the pilgrimage also required careful consideration. The traditional route from West Africa to Mecca passed through the Sahara Desert to Egypt, then across the Sinai Peninsula to the Arabian Peninsula. This was a well-established route that had been used by pilgrims for centuries, but it presented significant challenges for such a large expedition. The desert crossing was dangerous and difficult, requiring careful planning and timing to ensure the safety of the travelers. The preparations for the pilgrimage would ultimately take several years to complete, as the empire's administrators worked to coordinate all the different elements of the expedition. Supplies had to be gathered and organized, routes had to be surveyed and prepared, and diplomatic arrangements had to be made with the various rulers whose territories the caravan would pass through. The scale of the undertaking was unlike anything that had ever been attempted in the history of West Africa. As the preparations neared completion, word of the planned pilgrimage began to spread throughout the empire and beyond. The prospect of such a magnificent expedition captured the imagination of people throughout the Islamic world, who had never seen anything like the wealth and power that Mansa Musa was preparing to display. The pilgrimage was already becoming legendary before it had even begun. The final preparations for the great journey were now beginning in earnest. In the royal workshops of Niani, craftsmen worked day and night to prepare the elaborate equipment and supplies that would be needed for the expedition. Saddles and harnesses were crafted from the finest leather, decorated with gold and silver ornaments that would reflect the wealth and status of the imperial party. Tents were sewn from the finest fabrics, with intricate patterns that would provide both comfort and magnificence during the long journey across the desert. Part 4. The Great Caravan Organizing the Journey of Legends. The year 1324 has arrived, and the great palace of Niani has been transformed into a vast center of organization and preparation. Every courtyard echoes with the sounds of activity as the most ambitious expedition in human history takes shape. The morning air is filled with the scent of leather being worked, metal being forged, and fabrics being woven, while the constant murmur of voices creates a symphony of human endeavor that will soon give birth to a legend. Picture the scene as dawn breaks over the imperial capital. In the vast courtyards of the palace complex, thousands of workers move with purposeful efficiency, each contributing to the massive undertaking that will soon depart for the holy city of Mecca. This is not merely a pilgrimage, but a mobile city being prepared for one of the greatest journeys in human history. The scale of the enterprise is breathtaking, requiring organizational skills that would challenge even modern logistics experts. The numbers alone are staggering. Approximately 60,000 people will accompany Mansa Musa on his pilgrimage, creating a moving population larger than most cities of the medieval world. This vast multitude includes not only the Mansa himself and his immediate family, but also court officials, religious scholars, military guards, servants, craftsmen, merchants, musicians, and countless others whose skills and services will be needed during the long journey ahead. The composition of this great caravan reflects the sophistication and complexity of the Mali Empire itself. At its heart are the members of the royal court, carefully selected for their importance to the empire's governance and their ability to represent the Mansa's authority during the journey. These include the empire's most senior administrators, men who have spent their careers managing the complex affairs of state and who will continue to handle imperial business even while traveling thousands of miles from home. The religious contingent is equally impressive, consisting of the empire's most learned Islamic scholars, imams, and legal experts who will ensure that the pilgrimage is conducted according to proper Islamic law and tradition. These men carry with them copies of the Quran and other sacred texts, as well as the extensive knowledge necessary to guide the spiritual aspects of the journey. Their presence transforms the caravan from a simple expedition into a mobile center of Islamic learning and worship. The military escort that will protect this vast wealth is formidable, consisting of thousands of the empire's finest soldiers equipped with the best weapons and armor that the imperial armories can provide. These warriors are not merely guards but representatives of the empire's military might, trained in the arts of desert warfare and prepared to defend the caravan against any threat they might encounter during the long journey across hostile territory. The servants and support staff form the largest single group within the caravan, including cooks, grooms, porters, and countless others whose daily labor will keep the expedition functioning smoothly. These people, many of whom have been selected from the empire's most skilled artisans and workers, will be responsible for maintaining the equipment, preparing food, caring for the animals, and handling the 1,000 daily tasks that will be necessary to keep 60,000 people fed, sheltered, and healthy during their journey. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the caravan is its economic component. Nearly 100 camels will carry nothing but gold, each beast bearing between 30 and 60 kilograms of the precious metal. This represents a concentration of wealth that defies comprehension, an amount of gold that exceeds the annual production of entire kingdoms. The sight of these gold-laden camels will become one of the most enduring images of the pilgrimage, symbolizing the almost unimaginable wealth of the Mali Empire. The gold itself has been carefully prepared for the journey, with nuggets sorted by size and quality, and dust measured and packaged in leather pouches that can be easily transported and distributed. The imperial treasury has been working for months to prepare this vast quantity of precious metal, ensuring that it is properly weighed, recorded, and secured for the journey ahead. Special guards have been assigned to protect the gold-bearing camels, and elaborate procedures have been developed for its distribution during the pilgrimage. The animals that will carry this vast expedition across the desert represent another marvel of organization. In addition to the 100 camels bearing gold, thousands of additional camels will carry supplies, equipment, and people. These animals have been carefully selected for their strength, endurance, and ability to survive the harsh conditions of desert travel. Teams of skilled camel handlers, many of them Tuareg and Berber nomads who know the desert intimately, will care for these animals and guide them along the ancient trade routes. The horses that will carry the Mansa and his closest companions are equally impressive, representing the finest breeding stock available in West Africa. These animals have been specially trained for desert travel and equipped with elaborately decorated saddles and harnesses that reflect the status of their riders. The sight of Mansa Musa mounted on his magnificent stallion, surrounded by his splendidly attired courtiers, will create an image of imperial majesty that will be remembered for generations. The supplies needed to sustain this vast multitude during their journey have been accumulating for months in the warehouses of Niani. Tons of dried meat, grain, and other preserved foods have been prepared and packaged for transport. Water containers made from leather and metal have been crafted in enormous quantities, along with the equipment necessary for finding and purifying water in the desert. Medical supplies, tools, weapons, and countless other necessities have been gathered and organized with meticulous care. The clothing and equipment for the expedition reflect both practical needs and ceremonial requirements. Everyone in the caravan has been provided with appropriate garments for desert travel, including flowing robes that will protect them from the sun and sand, head coverings that will shield them from the harsh desert glare, and sturdy footwear that will withstand the rigors of long-distance travel. The Mansa and his court have been equipped with elaborate ceremonial garments that will be appropriate for the diplomatic and religious occasions they will encounter along the way. The tents that will house this vast multitude have been crafted with extraordinary skill and attention to detail. The Mansa's personal tent is a masterpiece of textile art, large enough to accommodate his court and decorated with intricate patterns that reflect his imperial status. The tents for his courtiers and officials are equally impressive, while even the common members of the expedition have been provided with adequate shelter that will protect them from the elements during their journey. The weapons and armor carried by the expedition reflect the military capabilities of the Mali Empire. The soldiers are equipped with spears, swords, and bows of the finest quality, while their armor consists of leather and metal pieces that will provide protection without being too heavy for desert travel. The commanders carry elaborate ceremonial weapons that serve both practical and symbolic purposes, demonstrating the empire's military might to anyone who might encounter the caravan. The musical instruments that will accompany the expedition represent another important element of the caravan's composition. Drums, flutes, and stringed instruments will provide entertainment during the long journey and will be used in the various ceremonies and celebrations that will mark important moments in the pilgrimage. The musicians who will play these instruments are skilled performers who have been selected for their ability to maintain morale and provide cultural continuity during the expedition. The day of departure finally arrives, marked by ceremonies that befit the magnitude of the undertaking. The entire population of Niani has gathered to witness the departure of their emperor, creating a sea of humanity that stretches as far as the eye can see. The air is filled with the sounds of prayers, songs, and the excited chatter of thousands of people who understand that they are witnessing a moment of historical significance. The ceremony begins before dawn with the call to prayer, as the entire caravan gathers for the morning prayers that will mark the beginning of their spiritual journey. Mansa Musa leads the prayers, his voice carrying across the vast multitude as he asks for Allah's blessing on their undertaking. The sight of 60,000 people prostrating themselves in prayer creates a powerful image of unity and devotion that will remain in the memory of all who witness it. As the sun rises over the horizon, the formal departure ceremonies begin. The Mansa, dressed in flowing robes of white silk and wearing a crown of gold and precious stones, mounts his horse and takes his position at the head of the great caravan. Behind him, the vast procession stretches for miles, creating a spectacle that defies description. The sound of drums and horns fills the air as the expedition begins to move, while the voices of the singers create a haunting melody that will accompany the caravan as it disappears into the distance. The organization of the moving caravan is as impressive as its size. The expedition moves in carefully planned sections, with the Mansa and his immediate court at the head, followed by the religious scholars, court officials, and military commanders. Behind them come the supply trains, the gold-bearing camels under heavy guard, and the vast multitude of servants and support staff. The entire procession is coordinated with military precision, with signals and procedures that ensure smooth movement despite the enormous number of people and animals involved. The first stages of the journey take the caravan across the familiar territories of the Mali Empire, where they are greeted by local officials and populations who have gathered to witness the historic departure. These early stages serve as a sort of rehearsal for the greater challenges that lie ahead, allowing the expedition's leaders to refine their procedures and address any problems that might arise during the more dangerous portions of the journey. The caravan's daily routine quickly becomes established as they move across the landscape. Each day begins with the call to prayer, followed by the breaking of camp and the organization of the day's march. The expedition moves during the cooler hours of the morning and evening, resting during the heat of the day when the sun makes travel difficult and dangerous. The evening camp is set up with the same precision as the morning departure, creating a temporary city that appears and disappears with clockwork regularity. As the caravan moves beyond the borders of the Mali Empire and enters the vast expanses of the Sahara Desert, the true magnitude of their undertaking becomes apparent. The landscape stretches endlessly in all directions, a sea of sand and rock broken only by the occasional oasis or rocky outcrop. The silence is profound, broken only by the sounds of the caravan itself, the soft padding of feet and hooves on sand, the creaking of leather and wood, and the low murmur of human voices. The desert presents challenges that test even the most careful preparations. The heat during the day is intense, creating a shimmering haze that distorts vision and makes even simple tasks difficult. The cold at night is equally harsh, requiring warm clothing and shelter to protect against the desert's brutal temperature swings. Water becomes the most precious commodity, more valuable than gold, and its careful management becomes essential for the survival of the entire expedition. The navigation of the desert requires skills that only the most experienced guides possess. The caravan follows ancient trade routes that have been used for centuries, marked by landmarks that are invisible to untrained eyes. The Tuareg and Berber guides who lead the expedition possess an intimate knowledge of the desert's moods and dangers, reading the signs of weather and terrain with an accuracy that seems almost supernatural to outsiders. The first major oasis reached by the caravan provides a welcome respite from the harsh conditions of desert travel. The sight of green palms and fresh water creates a sense of wonder and relief among the travelers, while the local population gathers to witness the arrival of the most magnificent caravan in history. The impact of the expedition on these small communities is profound, as the arrival of 60,000 people transforms their quiet existence into a bustling center of activity and commerce. The generosity that Mansa Musa displays at each stop along the route quickly becomes legendary. The local population is amazed by the quantities of gold that are distributed freely to anyone who approaches the imperial party. This generosity is not merely a display of wealth, but a reflection of the Mansa's deep religious convictions and his understanding of the Islamic principles of charity and hospitality. The sight of gold being distributed like common currency creates stories that will be told for generations. The economic impact of the caravan's passage through these oases is enormous. The sudden influx of gold and the demand for goods and services created by 60,000 travelers transforms the local economy overnight. Merchants arrive from great distances to trade with the caravan, bringing goods that have never been seen in these remote locations. The increased commercial activity continues long after the caravan has departed, as the gold distributed by Mansa Musa circulates through the region's economy. The cultural exchange that occurs at each stop is equally significant. The scholars and religious leaders traveling with the caravan engage in discussions with local Islamic authorities, sharing knowledge and perspectives that enrich the understanding of both groups. The musicians and performers in the expedition present their art to appreciative audiences, while local artists and craftsmen demonstrate their skills to the imperial party. These interactions create lasting bonds between the Mali Empire and the communities along the caravan route. The reputation of the caravan precedes it as news of its passage spreads throughout the region. Messengers carry word of the expedition's magnificence to distant cities and kingdoms, creating an atmosphere of anticipation and excitement that grows with each passing day. The stories of Mansa Musa's wealth and generosity become increasingly elaborate with each telling, transforming the already impressive reality into something approaching legend. The security challenges faced by the caravan are substantial, as the vast wealth it carries creates temptations that might prove irresistible to desert raiders and bandits. The military escort must remain constantly vigilant, with scouts ranging far ahead of the main body to detect any potential threats. The gold-bearing camels are kept under especially heavy guard, with multiple layers of security designed to protect this precious cargo from any possible attack. The diplomatic aspects of the journey become increasingly important as the caravan approaches the borders of other kingdoms and emirates. Advance parties are sent ahead to negotiate passage through foreign territories and to arrange for the supplies and assistance that will be needed along the route. These negotiations require considerable skill and sensitivity, as the arrival of such a large and wealthy expedition creates both opportunities and concerns for the rulers whose territories it will cross. The religious observances that mark the caravan's progress become increasingly elaborate as they approach the holy lands of Islam. Daily prayers are conducted with greater ceremony, and the scholars traveling with the expedition deliver sermons that prepare the pilgrims for the spiritual experiences that await them in Mecca. The sense of anticipation and devotion grows stronger with each passing day as the travelers contemplate the sacred nature of their journey. The physical challenges of desert travel test the endurance and resolve of even the most prepared travelers. The constant exposure to sun, sand, and wind takes its toll on both people and animals, requiring careful attention to health and hygiene. The expedition's medical staff work constantly to treat the various ailments that arise during the journey, from minor injuries to the more serious conditions that can develop during prolonged exposure to harsh conditions. The logistics of feeding 60,000 people in the desert present constant challenges that require innovative solutions. The caravan's cooks must prepare meals using limited water and fuel, while the constant movement makes it difficult to maintain the sanitary conditions necessary for health and safety. The distribution of food and water must be carefully managed to ensure that everyone receives their share, while maintaining the supplies necessary for the remainder of the journey. The social dynamics within the caravan create a complex web of relationships that must be carefully managed to maintain harmony and discipline. The mixing of people from different social classes and ethnic backgrounds creates opportunities for both conflict and cooperation, requiring skilled leadership to channel these energies in positive directions. The Mansa's personal example of piety and generosity serves as a unifying force that helps to maintain the expedition's cohesion and purpose. As the caravan continues its journey across the vast expanse of the Sahara, the landscape gradually begins to change. The endless dunes give way to rocky plateaus and scattered hills, while the vegetation becomes slightly more abundant as they approach the northern edge of the desert. The anticipation among the travelers grows stronger with each passing day, as they realize that they are approaching the end of the most difficult portion of their journey. The news of the caravan's approach begins to reach the great cities of Egypt, carried by traders and travelers who have encountered the expedition during its passage through the desert. These reports create a sensation in the markets and palaces of Cairo, as people struggle to comprehend the magnitude of the wealth and power that is approaching their city. The Mamluk Sultan and his court begin to prepare for the arrival of this extraordinary visitor, understanding that they are about to witness something unprecedented in the history of their region. The final stages of the desert crossing are marked by increasing excitement and anticipation as the caravan approaches the Nile Valley. The sight of the great river and the fertile lands of Egypt creates a sense of wonder and relief among the travelers, who have spent months crossing the harsh expanse of the Sahara. The green fields and palm groves of the Nile Delta appear like a vision of paradise after the stark beauty of the desert landscape. The organization required to bring 60,000 people and their animals safely across the Sahara Desert represents one of the greatest logistical achievements in human history. The success of the expedition demonstrates not only the wealth and power of the Mali Empire, but also the sophisticated administrative capabilities that have been developed to manage such complex undertakings. The approaching arrival in Egypt will mark the beginning of a new phase in the journey, one that will have profound implications for the history of both Africa and the Islamic world. Part 5. The Golden Storm. Cairo witnesses the unthinkable. The year 1324 is drawing to a close, and the great caravan of Mansa Musa approaches the fertile valley of the Nile River like a golden tide sweeping across the landscape. For months, the expedition has been a moving legend crossing the vast emptiness of the Sahara, but now it approaches one of the greatest cities in the medieval world, Cairo, the jewel of the Mamluk Sultanate and a crossroads of civilizations that has seen the rise and fall of empires for over a millennium. Picture the scene as the first scouts of the caravan crest the final ridge before the Nile Valley spreads out below them. The contrast is breathtaking after months of traveling through the harsh, monochromatic landscape of the desert. The green fields and palm groves of Egypt appear like an emerald vision rising from the earth. The great river winds through the valley like a silver ribbon, its waters reflecting the morning sun, while feluccas with their triangular sails drift peacefully downstream. But it is not just the beauty of the landscape that catches the breath of the weary travelers. Rising from the valley floor like a dream made manifest in stone and brick stands Cairo, one of the largest and most magnificent cities in the world. The city's minarets pierce the sky like golden spears, their calls to prayer echoing across the water, while the great dome of the citadel dominates the horizon. The smoke from thousands of cooking fires creates a hazy canopy over the city, and even from a distance, the sound of human activity, the calls of merchants, the creaking of cart wheels, the laughter of children carries on the wind. The news of the caravan's approach has preceded it by days, carried by swift messengers who have ridden ahead to announce the arrival of the most extraordinary expedition in human memory. The reports these messengers bring seem almost impossible to believe. A caravan of 60,000 people, led by an African emperor whose wealth is said to exceed that of all other rulers combined, approaching the city with more gold than anyone has ever seen. The markets of Cairo buzz with excitement and anticipation, while the Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad and his court prepare for what promises to be the most remarkable diplomatic encounter of their reign. The actual arrival of the caravan creates a sensation that defies description. The great gates of Cairo have been opened wide to accommodate the massive procession, and the entire population of the city seems to have gathered to witness this unprecedented spectacle. The sound of drums and horns announces the approach of the expedition, while the air fills with the dust raised by thousands of feet, hooves, and paws moving across the desert floor. At the head of the procession rides Mansa Musa himself, and the sight of him creates a collective gasp of wonder from the assembled crowd. He is mounted on a magnificent stallion whose harness glitters with gold and precious stones, while his own robes flow like liquid silk in the desert breeze. His crown, a masterpiece of the goldsmith's art, catches the sunlight and sends golden rays dancing across the faces of the spectators. But it is not just his appearance that impresses the crowd. It is the aura of power and dignity that surrounds him, the bearing of a man who has never doubted his own authority or questioned his place in the world. Behind him stretches the most magnificent procession that Cairo has ever witnessed. The scholars and court officials ride in careful formation, their robes and turbans creating a sea of color that flows like a river through the city streets. The soldiers march with precise discipline, their spears and shields gleaming in the sun, while the endless train of camels and servants stretches as far as the eye can see. But it is the gold-laden camels that truly capture the imagination of the crowd, nearly 100 beasts of burden, each carrying a fortune in precious metal that represents more wealth than most people will see in a lifetime. The sound of the crowd is overwhelming, thousands of voices calling out in wonder, amazement, and greeting, creating a wall of sound that seems to press against the very walls of the city. Children run alongside the procession, their eyes wide with wonder, while merchants and craftsmen abandon their shops to get a better view of this extraordinary spectacle. The very air seems to vibrate with excitement and anticipation, as if the city itself is holding its breath in wonder at what it is witnessing. The diplomatic protocol surrounding Mansa Musa's arrival requires careful navigation of the complex etiquette that governs relationships between Islamic rulers. The Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad is himself a powerful and sophisticated ruler, governing one of the most important states in the Islamic world from his palace in the citadel of Cairo. His court is renowned for its learning, wealth, and military prowess, and he is accustomed to receiving foreign dignitaries with the appropriate ceremony and respect. But the arrival of Mansa Musa presents unique challenges that test even the most experienced diplomats. The African emperor's wealth appears to exceed that of any contemporary ruler, while his display of power and magnificence threatens to overshadow even the splendor of the Mamluk court. The initial meetings between the two rulers are marked by a careful dance of mutual respect and subtle competition, as each seeks to honor the other while maintaining his own dignity and authority. The formal reception takes place in the great audience hall of the citadel, a magnificent space that has hosted the representatives of kingdoms and empires from across the known world. The hall is decorated with the finest examples of Islamic art and architecture, its walls covered with intricate geometric patterns and calligraphy that speak to the sophistication and cultural achievements of the Mamluk state. The ceiling soars overhead like a canopy of stars, while the floors are covered with the finest carpets and rugs that the empire's craftsmen can produce. The meeting between the two rulers is initially complicated by questions of protocol and precedence. Islamic diplomatic tradition requires that visiting rulers show appropriate respect to their hosts, but Mansa Musa's interpretation of these requirements differs from local expectations. The African emperor is willing to acknowledge al-Nasir Muhammad as a fellow Muslim ruler and to show him the courtesy due to a host, but he will not prostrate himself before another mortal man, reserving such gestures of submission for Allah alone. The resolution of this diplomatic impasse requires considerable skill and tact from both parties. Eventually, a compromise is reached that allows both rulers to maintain their dignity while observing the essential requirements of Islamic courtesy. The two men meet as equals, each acknowledging the other's sovereignty and authority while establishing the foundation for what will become a remarkable relationship of mutual respect and cooperation. The conversations between Mansa Musa and al-Nasir Muhammad reveal the depth of learning and sophistication that characterize both rulers. They discuss theology and law, sharing their understanding of Islamic principles and their experiences in governing diverse populations. They exchange information about their respective kingdoms, comparing administrative techniques and military strategies. The Mamluk Sultan is particularly interested in the sources of Mali's wealth and the methods used to extract and control the gold trade, while Mansa Musa seeks to understand the complex diplomatic relationships that govern the Middle Eastern political landscape. But it is in the streets and markets of Cairo that Mansa Musa's arrival has its most profound and lasting impact. The African emperor's generosity is legendary even before his arrival, but the reality exceeds even the most extravagant expectations. From the moment he enters the city, Mansa Musa begins distributing gold with a largesse that astounds even the most sophisticated observers. He scatters gold coins like flower petals, giving away precious metal with the casual generosity of a man for whom such wealth is commonplace. The scenes that unfold in the markets of Cairo are unlike anything the city has ever witnessed. Mansa Musa and his entourage move through the commercial districts like a golden storm, leaving a trail of astonished merchants and overjoyed recipients in their wake. The emperor purchases goods not because he needs them, but simply to demonstrate his wealth and generosity. He buys entire shops' worth of merchandise, paying prices that are many times the asking amount, then distributes the goods freely to anyone who approaches him. The psychological impact of this display of wealth is profound and immediate. The people of Cairo, accustomed to the prosperity of one of the world's great trading cities, find themselves confronted with a level of affluence that challenges their very understanding of what wealth means. The sight of gold being distributed like common currency creates a sense of wonder and disbelief that spreads through the city like wildfire. Stories of the African emperor's generosity multiply and grow with each telling, transforming an already extraordinary reality into something approaching legend. The economic effects of Mansa Musa's generosity become apparent within days of his arrival. The sudden influx of gold into the Cairo economy creates immediate distortions in the local market that will have consequences lasting for years to come. Merchants who have received gold from the emperor's hand suddenly find themselves wealthier than they had ever imagined possible, while the increased money supply begins to drive up prices throughout the city. The gold dealers and money changers of Cairo, normally the arbiters of precious metal values, find themselves overwhelmed by the quantities of gold suddenly flooding the market. The traditional relationship between gold and other currencies begins to break down as the supply of precious metal far exceeds normal demand. For the first time in memory, gold becomes so common that its value relative to other goods begins to decline, creating a phenomenon that will be remembered for generations. The 3 months that Mansa Musa spends in Cairo transform the city in ways that extend far beyond the immediate economic impacts. The emperor's court becomes a center of diplomatic and cultural activity, attracting visitors from across the Islamic world who come to witness this unprecedented display of African wealth and power. Scholars and officials from throughout the Mamluk Sultanate travel to Cairo to meet the legendary ruler, while foreign ambassadors adjust their plans to take advantage of this unique opportunity for contact with the Mali Empire. The intellectual exchanges that occur during this period are particularly significant. Mansa Musa's scholars engage in extensive discussions with their Egyptian counterparts, sharing knowledge and perspectives that enrich both traditions. The libraries of Cairo provide access to manuscripts and texts that are not available in West Africa, while the African visitors bring their own contributions to the ongoing development of Islamic thought and scholarship. The architectural and artistic influences that result from this cultural exchange will have lasting impacts on both civilizations. Egyptian architects and craftsmen are invited to return to Mali with the emperor's caravan, bringing their skills and knowledge to the development of West African Islamic architecture. The techniques and styles they will introduce will transform the appearance of cities like Timbuktu and Djenné, creating a distinctive architectural tradition that blends African and Middle Eastern elements. The religious aspects of the visit are equally significant. Mansa Musa's obvious piety and deep commitment to Islamic principles impress Egyptian religious authorities, who recognize in him a kindred spirit devoted to the faith. The emperor's participation in religious ceremonies and his generous support of Cairo's mosques and religious institutions demonstrate the sincerity of his conversion to Islam and his commitment to the Muslim community. The social impact of the visit extends throughout all levels of Cairo society. The emperor's generosity touches everyone from the wealthiest merchants to the poorest beggars, creating a sense of shared experience that transcends normal social boundaries. The stories of personal encounters with the African emperor become treasured family legends that will be passed down through generations, while the gold coins distributed during the visit become prized heirlooms that preserve the memory of this extraordinary moment. The merchants of Cairo find themselves in an unprecedented situation as the emperor's purchases drive up demand for luxury goods throughout the city. Silk merchants, jewelers, and craftsmen of all kinds experience a business boom unlike anything they have ever seen, as the emperor's entourage competes to acquire the finest goods available. The workshops of the city work overtime to meet the demand, while merchants send urgent messages to suppliers throughout the region asking for additional inventory. The inflation that results from this sudden injection of wealth into the economy creates winners and losers throughout Cairo society. Those who possess goods to sell benefit enormously from the increased demand and higher prices, while those who depend on fixed incomes find their purchasing power diminished by the rising cost of living. The government attempts to manage these economic disruptions through various administrative measures, but the sheer scale of the phenomenon makes effective control almost impossible. The psychological effects of the inflation are perhaps as significant as the economic impacts. The people of Cairo find themselves living in a world where the normal rules of commerce no longer apply, where gold is so common that its value fluctuates daily, and where the very concept of wealth has been redefined by the presence of the African emperor. This experience creates a sense of economic vertigo that will influence the city's consciousness for years to come. The diplomatic consequences of Mansa Musa's visit extend far beyond the immediate relationship between Mali and the Mamluk Sultanate. News of the emperor's wealth and generosity spreads throughout the Islamic world, reaching the courts of rulers from Spain to Central Asia. The image of an African ruler whose wealth exceeds that of any contemporary monarch challenges existing assumptions about the distribution of power and resources in the medieval world. The intelligence networks that connect the various Islamic states carry detailed reports of the emperor's visit, creating a sensation in courts that had previously been only dimly aware of West African civilization. The diplomatic correspondence of the period reveals a sudden surge of interest in establishing relationships with the Mali Empire, as rulers throughout the Islamic world recognize the potential benefits of alliance with such a wealthy and powerful state. The cultural impact of the visit is equally profound, as the image of Mansa Musa and his magnificent caravan enters the collective consciousness of the Islamic world. Artists and writers begin to incorporate African themes into their work, while scholars develop new theories about the relationship between Africa and the broader Islamic community. The emperor's visit becomes a reference point for discussions of wealth, power, and piety that will influence Islamic thought for generations. The 3 months in Cairo also provide Mansa Musa with valuable intelligence about the broader political and economic situation in the Islamic world. The emperor's discussions with local officials and merchants give him insights into the complex relationships that govern trade and diplomacy throughout the Middle East. This information will prove invaluable as he continues his journey, and as he develops policies for managing Mali's relationships with distant Islamic states. The preparations for the caravan's departure from Cairo are as elaborate as those that marked its arrival. The emperor's purchases during his stay have significantly increased the expedition's baggage, while the Egyptian architects and craftsmen who will accompany him to Mali require additional supplies and equipment. The organization of the departure requires careful coordination to ensure that the caravan remains manageable while incorporating its new members and acquisitions. The economic disruption caused by the emperor's visit continues to reverberate through Cairo's markets, even as the caravan prepares to leave. The gold that has been distributed throughout the city continues to circulate, creating ongoing inflationary pressures that will persist for years to come. The money changers and merchants who have benefited from the emperor's generosity find themselves in a new economic reality where the traditional relationships between different forms of wealth have been fundamentally altered. The farewell ceremonies that mark the caravan's departure are subdued compared to the excitement of its arrival, but they carry their own emotional weight. The people of Cairo who have witnessed this extraordinary display of African wealth and power understand that they have been present at a moment of historical significance. The emperor's departure marks the end of an experience that has transformed their understanding of the world and their place within it. As the great caravan begins to move eastward toward the holy city of Mecca, the dust raised by 60,000 feet and countless animals gradually settles over the streets of Cairo. But the memory of what has transpired will not settle so easily. The economic effects of Mansa Musa's visit will continue to influence Cairo's markets for more than a decade, while the cultural and diplomatic impacts will resonate throughout the Islamic world for generations to come. The next phase of the journey will take the caravan through the Sinai Peninsula and into the Arabian Peninsula itself, approaching the most sacred sites in Islam. The emperor's experience in Cairo has demonstrated the power of his wealth to transform the places he visits, but it has also revealed the profound spiritual commitment that motivates his journey. As the caravan disappears into the eastern desert, heading toward the ultimate destination of Mecca, the true test of the emperor's faith and devotion still lies ahead. Part 6. The Sacred Journey, from Desert to Divine Presence. The landscape changes as the great caravan moves eastward from the fertile valley of the Nile into the ancient wilderness of the Sinai Peninsula. Here, the very ground beneath their feet carries the weight of sacred history. For this is the desert where Moses received the 10 Commandments, where the children of Israel wandered for 40 years, and where countless pilgrims have passed on their way to the holy cities of Islam. The air itself seems to vibrate with spiritual significance, as if the prayers of millennia have soaked into the rocks and sand. Picture the caravan as it winds its way through the stark beauty of the Sinai, a river of humanity flowing across a landscape that has remained virtually unchanged since the dawn of recorded history. The mountains rise like ancient sentinels on either side of the route, their peaks catching the first light of dawn and the last rays of sunset in displays of natural majesty that humble even the most magnificent human achievements. The silence here is profound, broken only by the sounds of the caravan itself, the soft shuffling of thousands of feet, the gentle bells of the camels, and the low murmur of voices raised in prayer. For Mansa Musa, this portion of the journey represents a profound spiritual transition. The worldly magnificence that marked his passage through Cairo gives way to a deeper, more contemplative focus on the sacred nature of his pilgrimage. The emperor spends long hours in prayer and meditation, preparing his heart and mind for the holy experiences that await him in Mecca. His scholars and religious advisors gather around him each evening, reading from the Quran and discussing the spiritual significance of the rituals they will soon perform. The crossing of the Sinai is not merely a physical journey but a spiritual purification, a stripping away of worldly concerns in preparation for the most sacred act that a Muslim can perform. The harshness of the desert environment serves as a reminder of human mortality and dependence on divine grace, while the beauty of the landscape speaks to the glory of Allah's creation. Each sunrise and sunset becomes a moment of prayer and reflection, as the travelers contemplate the majesty of the divine power that has brought them to this sacred place. The approach to the Arabian Peninsula marks another milestone in the pilgrimage, as the caravan enters the homeland of Islam itself. The very air seems different here, charged with the spiritual energy that emanates from the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. The emperor's excitement is palpable, but it is tempered by a deep sense of humility and reverence. He understands that he is approaching the most sacred site in Islam, the place where the Prophet Muhammad received his first revelation and where Muslims from around the world come to fulfill their religious obligations. The final approach to Mecca is marked by increasing spiritual intensity as the caravan joins the streams of pilgrims converging on the holy city from all directions. The routes leading to Mecca have been traveled by countless believers over the centuries, worn smooth by the feet of pilgrims from every corner of the Islamic world. The diversity of the pilgrimage is breathtaking: merchants from Baghdad walking alongside farmers from Anatolia, scholars from Cordoba sharing the road with nomads from Central Asia, all united in their common purpose of worship and devotion. For the first time in his journey, Mansa Musa finds himself not as a unique figure commanding attention through his wealth and power, but as one believer among many, all equal in their devotion to Allah. The emperor's magnificent robes are set aside in favor of the simple white garments worn by all pilgrims, the ihram that symbolizes the equality of all Muslims before God. In these humble clothes, the richest man in the world becomes indistinguishable from the poorest beggar, united with his fellow pilgrims in the fundamental act of submission to divine will. The sight of Mecca rising from the desert creates a moment of overwhelming emotion that brings tears to the eyes of even the most hardened travelers. The city spreads before them like a jewel set in a crown of mountains, its minarets reaching toward heaven, while the great mosque at its heart draws the eye like a magnet. The sound of the call to prayer echoes across the valley, carried on the desert wind like the voice of angels, while the constant movement of white-robed pilgrims creates a sea of devotion that stretches as far as the eye can see. The entry into Mecca itself is a moment of profound spiritual significance that will remain etched in the memory of every participant for the rest of their lives. The emperor dismounts from his horse and walks the final distance to the great mosque, his feet touching the same ground that was blessed by the presence of the Prophet Muhammad centuries earlier. The weight of history and the magnitude of the moment create an almost overwhelming sense of connection to the divine, as if the veil between the earthly and heavenly realms has been lifted. The great mosque of Mecca, known as the Masjid al-Haram, is unlike any building the emperor has ever seen. Its vast courtyards can accommodate hundreds of thousands of worshippers, while its minarets soar into the sky like prayers made manifest in stone. But it is the Kaaba, the cube-shaped building at the mosque center, that commands the attention of every pilgrim. This ancient structure, draped in black silk and surrounded by the constant movement of circumambulating pilgrims, represents the spiritual center of the Islamic world and the focal point of Muslim prayer throughout the globe. The first sight of the Kaaba creates a moment of spiritual intensity that defies description. Mansa Musa, like countless pilgrims before and after him, finds himself overwhelmed by the presence of the sacred, his worldly concerns dissolving in the face of divine majesty. The emperor falls to his knees in prayer, his heart filled with gratitude for the grace that has brought him to this most holy place. The tears that stream down his face are not tears of sadness but of joy, the natural response of a human soul confronted with the infinite love and mercy of Allah. The ritual of tawaf, the circumambulation of the Kaaba, represents the beginning of the formal pilgrimage rites and creates one of the most powerful spiritual experiences in human religion. 7 times the pilgrims circle the sacred structure, moving in a counterclockwise direction that mirrors the movement of the heavens themselves. The emperor joins this human river of devotion, his voice joining those of hundreds of thousands of other pilgrims as they recite the ancient prayers and supplications that have been offered at this spot for over 1,000 years. The diversity of the pilgrimage community becomes most apparent during the tawaf, as believers from every corner of the Islamic world move together in perfect harmony. African pilgrims from Mali and other West African kingdoms walk alongside Turkish soldiers from the Ottoman frontiers, while Persian merchants share the sacred space with Andalusian scholars and Indonesian traders. The languages spoken during the circumambulation represent the full spectrum of human speech, yet all are united in their recitation of Arabic prayers and their common devotion to the same divine purpose. For Mansa Musa, the tawaf represents a profound spiritual transformation, a moment when his identity as an emperor gives way to his fundamental identity as a servant of Allah. The wealth and power that have defined his worldly existence become irrelevant in the face of the divine presence that permeates the sacred space. The emperor's heart is filled with humility and gratitude, his mind focused entirely on the prayers and supplications that flow from his lips like water from a spring. The completion of the tawaf leads to the performance of Sa'i, the ritual running between the hills of Safa and Marwa that commemorates Hagar's desperate search for water for her son Ishmael. This ritual, performed 7 times between the 2 hills, reminds pilgrims of the importance of perseverance and trust in divine providence. The emperor's own journey across the Sahara Desert takes on new meaning as he reflects on Hagar's faith and determination, understanding that his own pilgrimage is part of a continuum of human devotion that stretches back to the very origins of monotheistic faith. The days spent in Mecca are filled with constant prayer, meditation, and religious instruction as the emperor and his companions prepare for the climactic moment of the pilgrimage, the standing at Arafat. This ritual, performed on the 9th day of the Islamic month of Dhu al-Hijjah, represents the spiritual heart of the Hajj and the moment when pilgrims stand before Allah in direct supplication and repentance. The anticipation of this moment fills the air with palpable spiritual energy, as hundreds of thousands of pilgrims prepare their hearts and minds for the most sacred act of their lives. The journey to the plain of Arafat begins before dawn, as the massive crowd of pilgrims moves out of Mecca in a procession that stretches for miles across the desert landscape. The emperor travels with his companions, but his thoughts are focused inward, on the prayers and supplications he will offer when he stands before his Creator. The pre-dawn darkness gradually gives way to the first light of sunrise, revealing the vast multitude of believers making their way toward the sacred plain. The plain of Arafat itself is a sight that defies description, a vast expanse of desert floor covered with the white-robed figures of pilgrims from every nation on earth. The scale of the gathering is overwhelming. Hundreds of thousands of believers united in common purpose, their voices joining in a chorus of prayer and supplication that seems to shake the very foundations of the earth. The emperor takes his place among this multitude, his imperial status forgotten in the face of the universal equality that characterizes the pilgrimage. The standing at Arafat begins at noon and continues until sunset, creating a spiritual intensity that builds throughout the day. The emperor spends these hours in constant prayer, his heart open to the divine presence that permeates the sacred space. He prays for his people, for his empire, for the Muslim community worldwide, and for his own spiritual development. The prayers flow from his lips like a river, carrying with them the hopes and fears of a lifetime spent in service to his faith and his people. The experience of standing at Arafat creates a profound sense of connection to the divine that transcends ordinary human experience. The emperor feels the presence of Allah in a way that is both intimate and universal, personal and cosmic. The worldly concerns that normally occupy his thoughts, the governance of his empire, the management of his wealth, the challenges of leadership, fade into insignificance as he focuses entirely on his relationship with his creator. The sunset at Arafat marks the end of the standing and the beginning of the rush toward Muzdalifah, where pilgrims will spend the night under the stars. The emperor joins this massive movement of humanity, his heart filled with joy and gratitude for the spiritual experiences he has undergone. The night at Muzdalifah is spent in prayer and contemplation, as the pilgrims prepare for the final rituals of the Hajj. The stoning of the pillars at Mina represents the symbolic rejection of Satan and the forces of evil that seek to lead believers astray. The emperor participates in this ritual with the same intensity he has brought to every aspect of his pilgrimage, understanding that the stones he throws represent his commitment to resist temptation and maintain his devotion to Allah. The ritual is performed with precision and devotion, each stone thrown with a prayer and a commitment to spiritual purification. The sacrifice that follows the stoning represents the willingness of believers to surrender their most precious possessions in service to Allah. The emperor's sacrifice is magnificent in its scale, reflecting his extraordinary wealth and his deep commitment to the principles of Islamic charity. Thousands of animals are slaughtered in his name, their meat distributed to the poor and needy who have gathered for the pilgrimage. This act of generosity reflects the same spirit that has characterized his entire journey, the understanding that wealth is a trust from Allah that must be used for the benefit of the community. The final circumambulation of the Kaaba marks the completion of the Hajj rituals and the transformation of the pilgrims into Haji, those who have successfully completed the pilgrimage. The emperor's heart is filled with a sense of accomplishment and spiritual fulfillment that transcends any worldly achievement. He has fulfilled one of the fundamental obligations of his faith, joining the ranks of believers who have made the sacred journey to the heart of Islam. The interactions with fellow pilgrims during the Hajj create lasting bonds that transcend national, ethnic, and social boundaries. The emperor meets believers from every corner of the Islamic world, sharing stories, exchanging ideas, and forming friendships that will endure long after the pilgrimage is completed. These encounters reinforce his understanding of Islam as a universal faith that unites believers across all divisions of race, nationality, and social class. The spiritual transformation that Mansa Musa undergoes during his pilgrimage is profound and lasting. The emperor who began the journey as a wealthy and powerful ruler concerned with the temporal affairs of his empire emerges as a transformed believer whose priorities have been fundamentally reordered. His commitment to his faith has been deepened and strengthened, while his understanding of his responsibilities as a Muslim ruler has been clarified and refined. The emperor's generosity during the pilgrimage extends far beyond the required sacrifices, as he distributes gold and gifts to pilgrims from throughout the Islamic world. This generosity is not simply a display of wealth, but a reflection of his deep understanding of the Islamic principles of charity and brotherhood. The recipients of his gifts carry word of his generosity back to their homelands, spreading the reputation of the Mali Empire throughout the Islamic world. The educational opportunities provided by the pilgrimage are equally significant, as the emperor and his scholars engage in extensive discussions with religious authorities from throughout the Islamic world. These conversations provide insights into different interpretations of Islamic law and theology, enriching the emperor's understanding of his faith and providing knowledge that will inform his governance of the Mali Empire. The architectural and artistic inspiration that the emperor draws from his pilgrimage will have lasting impacts on the development of Islamic culture in West Africa. The mosques and other religious buildings he has seen in Mecca and other holy cities provide models for the construction projects he will undertake upon his return to Mali. The craftsmen and architects who accompany him on the return journey will bring these influences back to West Africa, creating a lasting legacy of his pilgrimage. The completion of the Hajj rituals marks the beginning of preparations for the return journey to Mali. The emperor's heart is filled with both joy at the spiritual fulfillment he has experienced and sadness at leaving the holy places behind. The return journey will be as significant as the outward journey, providing opportunities to consolidate the relationships he has formed and to implement the lessons he has learned during his pilgrimage. The planning for the return journey requires careful consideration of the changed circumstances that now govern the expedition. The emperor's generosity during the pilgrimage has significantly reduced the caravan's financial resources, while the addition of new companions and the acquisition of gifts and souvenirs have increased the logistical challenges of the journey. The route for the return journey may need to be modified to take advantage of new opportunities and to avoid potential difficulties. The spiritual impact of the pilgrimage will continue to influence the emperor's thoughts and actions throughout the return journey and for the rest of his life. The experiences he has undergone in the holy cities of Islam have created a transformation that will affect not only his personal faith, but also his approach to governance and his understanding of his role as a leader of the Muslim community. The return journey will provide time for reflection and contemplation, allowing the emperor to integrate the lessons of his pilgrimage into his worldview and his plans for the future of the Mali Empire. Part 7. The Golden Return Transforming an Empire. The caravan that begins its journey back toward the Mali Empire is fundamentally different from the one that had departed from Niani over a year earlier. The physical changes are immediately apparent. The 100 camels that once carried tons of gold now bear a different kind of treasure, one that will prove even more valuable in the long term. The emperor's legendary generosity during the pilgrimage has dramatically reduced the expedition's financial resources, but it has replaced material wealth with something far more precious: knowledge, relationships, and spiritual transformation that will reshape the very foundations of West African civilization. Picture the scene as the great caravan prepares to depart from the holy lands of Arabia. The emperor himself appears transformed by his pilgrimage experience, his bearing reflecting the profound spiritual fulfillment he has achieved through the completion of the Hajj. His eyes hold a depth of understanding that was not present at the beginning of the journey, while his manner suggests a man who has touched the divine and been forever changed by the experience. The worldly concerns that once preoccupied his thoughts have been balanced by a deeper appreciation for the spiritual dimensions of leadership and the responsibilities that come with great wealth and power. The composition of the returning caravan reflects the international connections that have been forged during the pilgrimage. Scattered throughout the vast multitude are scholars, craftsmen, and religious teachers from across the Islamic world who have accepted the emperor's invitation to join him in his return to West Africa. These men bring with them not only their individual skills and knowledge, but also their connections to the broader Islamic intellectual and cultural community, creating links that will enrich Mali civilization for generations to come. Among the most significant of these new companions are the architects and builders who will transform the appearance of Mali's cities and create some of the most distinctive examples of Islamic architecture in West Africa. The leader of this group is Es Saheli, a master architect from Granada whose reputation extends throughout the Islamic world. His decision to accompany the emperor back to Mali represents a crucial moment in the cultural exchange between the Middle East and West Africa, bringing sophisticated architectural knowledge to a region eager to express its Islamic identity through monumental construction. The journey back through the Arabian Peninsula provides opportunities for the emperor to consolidate the relationships he has formed during his pilgrimage and to deepen his understanding of the Islamic world's complex political and cultural landscape. The return route takes the caravan through Damascus, one of the great cities of the Islamic world, where the emperor is received with honors befitting his reputation as the wealthiest ruler in the world. The reception in Damascus further enhances the emperor's international standing while providing additional opportunities for cultural and intellectual exchange. The return to Egypt marks a significant moment in the expedition, as the caravan approaches the scene of their earlier triumph. The news of their approach creates excitement throughout the Nile Valley, as people remember the extraordinary impact of the emperor's previous visit. But the Egypt they return to is not the same country they left months earlier. The economic effects of Mansa Musa's generosity continue to reverberate through the local economy, creating ongoing inflation and monetary instability that will persist for years to come. The emperor's second stay in Cairo is markedly different from his first visit, reflecting both the changed circumstances of the expedition and the transformation in his own perspective. The massive distribution of gold that characterized his earlier stay is replaced by more focused and purposeful spending, as the emperor seeks to acquire specific knowledge and skills that will benefit his empire. The shops and markets of Cairo once again benefit from his patronage, but the economic impact is more controlled and strategic than the overwhelming generosity of his first visit. The recruitment of skilled craftsmen and scholars during this second stay in Egypt represents one of the most important long-term consequences of the pilgrimage. The emperor's agents work systematically to identify and recruit individuals whose skills will be particularly valuable in the development of Mali's urban centers and educational institutions. These recruitment efforts focus not only on immediate technical skills but also on the cultural knowledge that will enable the effective adaptation of Islamic civilization to West African conditions. The architectural specialists who join the expedition bring with them detailed knowledge of Islamic building techniques, decorative arts, and urban planning principles that will revolutionize construction in the Mali Empire. Their expertise extends beyond mere technical knowledge to include understanding of the symbolic and spiritual dimensions of Islamic architecture, enabling them to create buildings that will serve both practical and religious purposes in their new West African context. The scholars and teachers who accompany the return journey represent an equally important cultural resource, bringing with them manuscripts, teaching methods, and intellectual traditions that will enhance the educational institutions of Timbuktu and other Mali cities. Their presence will help to strengthen the connections between West African Islamic learning and the broader Islamic intellectual community, ensuring that Mali scholars remain connected to the latest developments in Islamic thought and scholarship. The economic advisors and merchants who join the expedition bring knowledge of international trade networks, banking systems, and commercial practices that will enhance Mali's participation in the global economy. Their expertise will prove particularly valuable in managing the empire's gold resources and in developing new commercial relationships with distant markets. The international connections they provide will enable Mali merchants to operate more effectively in the complex web of relationships that governs medieval Islamic commerce. The return journey across the Sinai Peninsula and through the Egyptian desert provides time for the emperor to develop relationships with his new companions and to begin planning the implementation of the knowledge and skills they bring. The daily conversations during the long desert crossing create bonds of mutual respect and understanding that will facilitate the successful integration of these foreign experts into Mali society. The emperor's own curiosity and intelligence enable him to absorb much of what his companions have to teach, making him a more effective leader and a more sophisticated ruler. The crossing of the Sahara Desert on the return journey presents the same physical challenges as the outward journey, but the psychological and spiritual context is entirely different. The emperor and his companions travel with the satisfaction of having completed one of the most significant spiritual journeys in human experience, while the knowledge and relationships they carry with them create a sense of anticipation about the transformation they will bring to West African civilization. The desert crossing also provides opportunities for the emperor's new companions to observe and understand the African environment and culture that will become their new home. The scholars and craftsmen from the Middle East gain first-hand experience of the challenges and opportunities that characterize life in West Africa, enabling them to adapt their knowledge and skills to local conditions. This process of cultural adaptation begins during the journey itself, as the foreign experts begin to understand the unique characteristics of their new environment. The return to Mali territory is marked by celebrations and ceremonies that reflect the empire's joy at the successful completion of the emperor's pilgrimage. The news of the caravan's approach spreads throughout the empire, creating excitement and anticipation as people prepare to welcome their returning ruler. The emperor's subjects understand that their leader has achieved something extraordinary, not only completing the sacred pilgrimage but also enhancing the empire's international reputation and bringing back valuable knowledge and skills. The final approach to Niani, the imperial capital, creates scenes of celebration that rival those that marked the caravan's departure over a year earlier. The entire population of the city gathers to welcome their emperor home, while delegations from throughout the empire arrive to participate in the ceremonies. The emperor's return is not just a personal triumph but a moment of national celebration that reinforces the unity and pride of the Mali Empire. The changes that the emperor implements upon his return reflect the profound transformation he has undergone during his pilgrimage. The construction projects that he initiates, guided by the expertise of his new architectural advisors, will create some of the most distinctive and beautiful examples of Islamic architecture in West Africa. The Great Mosque of Timbuktu, designed by Es Saheli and constructed with the emperor's patronage, will stand as a lasting monument to the cultural exchange that resulted from the pilgrimage. The educational reforms that the emperor institutes upon his return will have equally lasting impacts on Mali civilization. The scholars and teachers who have accompanied him from the Middle East work to enhance the curricula of existing schools while establishing new institutions that will attract students from throughout West Africa. The manuscript collections that they bring with them, combined with the copying and translation projects they initiate, will make Mali's libraries among the most comprehensive in the Islamic world. The administrative changes that the emperor implements reflect his enhanced understanding of Islamic governance and his commitment to ruling according to Islamic principles. The legal system is refined and expanded to incorporate the insights he has gained from his interactions with Islamic scholars and judges, while the empire's diplomatic relationships are strengthened through the international connections he has established during his pilgrimage. The economic policies that the emperor pursues upon his return demonstrate his sophisticated understanding of the relationship between spiritual and material wealth. The empire's gold resources are managed more strategically, with greater attention to their role in supporting Islamic institutions and charitable activities. The international trade relationships that have been established during the pilgrimage create new opportunities for commercial development, while maintaining the empire's position as a major player in the global economy. The cultural transformation that occurs in Mali following the emperor's return is profound and multifaceted. The architectural innovations introduced by the Middle Eastern craftsmen create a distinctive West African Islamic style that will influence building design throughout the region. The educational developments strengthen Mali's position as a center of Islamic learning while creating new opportunities for intellectual exchange with the broader Islamic world. The religious developments that result from the pilgrimage deepen the Islamic character of Mali civilization while maintaining respect for local traditions and customs. The emperor's enhanced piety and his commitment to Islamic principles create a model for religious observance that influences the behavior of his subjects while strengthening the empire's connections to the broader Islamic community. The international reputation that the emperor has gained through his pilgrimage continues to pay dividends long after his return to Mali. The diplomatic relationships he has established during the journey create opportunities for political and commercial cooperation that benefit the empire for generations. The image of Mali as a wealthy and powerful Islamic state, firmly established through the emperor's pilgrimage, attracts scholars, merchants, and craftsmen from throughout the Islamic world. The artistic and cultural developments that result from the pilgrimage create new forms of expression that blend Islamic and African traditions in unique and beautiful ways. The decorative arts that flourish under the influence of the Middle Eastern craftsmen create distinctive styles that will influence artistic development throughout West Africa. The literary works that are produced in Mali's enhanced educational institutions contribute to the broader development of Islamic literature while preserving and celebrating local traditions. The long-term economic impacts of the pilgrimage extend far beyond the immediate effects of the emperor's generous spending. The international connections that have been established create lasting trade relationships that benefit Mali's economy for generations. The enhanced reputation of the empire attracts investment and commercial interest from throughout the Islamic world, while the strategic management of gold resources ensures continued prosperity. The social changes that result from the pilgrimage reflect the emperor's enhanced understanding of Islamic principles of social justice and community responsibility. The charitable institutions that he establishes upon his return provide support for the poor and needy while strengthening the bonds that unite Mali society. The educational opportunities that are expanded through his reforms create new possibilities for social advancement while maintaining the traditional structures that provide stability and continuity. The military developments that result from the pilgrimage reflect the emperor's enhanced understanding of the international political situation and the need to maintain Mali's security in a complex world. The diplomatic relationships that have been established during the journey create new opportunities for military cooperation while reducing potential sources of conflict. The enhanced reputation of the empire serves as a deterrent to potential enemies while attracting allies and supporters. The technological innovations that result from the pilgrimage, introduced by the craftsmen and scholars who have accompanied the emperor's return, enhance Mali's capabilities in numerous fields. The architectural techniques that are introduced create new possibilities for monumental construction, while the educational methods that are implemented improve the training of administrators and professionals. The commercial practices that are adopted enhance the empire's participation in international trade while maintaining its competitive advantages. As the years pass following the emperor's return, the full significance of his pilgrimage becomes increasingly apparent. The transformation that he has brought to the Mali Empire extends far beyond the immediate changes in architecture, education, and administration. The pilgrimage has fundamentally altered the empire's relationship with the Islamic world and its understanding of its own identity and purpose. The legend of Mansa Musa's journey will continue to inspire and influence people throughout the Islamic world and beyond, creating a lasting legacy that will endure long after the emperor himself has passed from the scene. The seeds that were planted during the pilgrimage will continue to grow and develop, creating a flowering of Islamic civilization in West Africa that will astonish the world. The empire that the emperor built upon his return will stand as a testament to the transformative power of spiritual commitment and the importance of cultural exchange in human development. The story of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage will become one of the great tales of medieval history, inspiring future generations and demonstrating the remarkable achievements that are possible when wealth, power, and faith are combined in service to a higher purpose.